You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
It's time to head south with the Fantha From Down Under. Here's your host, Adam O'Brien.
G'day, mate. How you going? This is Little Mullet and, of course, the Fantha From Down Under here on FanthaTracks.com. Star Wars news in a single file. Australian Star Wars fans, make sure you got your Disney Plus ready because just around the corner, May 27 here, we're going to have the first 2 episodes of the Kenobi TV series. And I tell you what, it's got me interested, folks. They really seem to have taken the leads from what was left over from the prequel trilogy and really thrown it into the meat grinder. And that's what I'm talking about, folks. I'm talking about a dark period of Star Wars history. I mean, look, let's face it, everything's going to go bad. You know, all that nice stuff that George had here and there and all this beautiful design work, boom, along comes the Empire and says, guess what? We are going to destroy all that. And they do, folks, and we're going to see part of that in this series. I like that it's a few years after Revenge of the Sith and a lot closer to, of course, Star Wars A New Hope. At this stage, we see Kenobi really drawn out, and he's just had it. You can see the sweat draining from him. Another series on Tatooine, folks. Yes, we've got to love our Tatooine. But it looks like he actually goes off-planet, because you look at the trailer, which has just come out only recently. It looks great, because we're getting to see little bits and pieces of what could be another planet. And, of course, we've got the Inquisitors hunting down the many Jedi that are left. And, of course, one of them being Kenobi, but, of course, there's a number of different Padawans that got out and all that sort of thing. We get to see in the footage too, these are Force-sensitive Inquisitors, you know, so they're definitely the pick of the bunch that Emperor Palpatine and, of course, Darth Vader himself are in charge of. So we're going to see a bit of that, and, you know, there's been much talk about the fact the series was originally going to have Darth Maul as part of the series, but, you know, when the powers that be came in and really decided to change it and get more personal, which is the end of the day. It is a story about Obi-Wan and Anakin, because that's where we left them, folks, and Mustafar. In this news segment, we're going to go through some of my thoughts on who's in the actual series itself, and, of course, tie-ins from Revenge of the Sith and other parts of the series which are going to be in there. So I'm really excited. The rest of the episode, folks, we are going to be looking at some of what is really quite a cohesive set of movies, the prequel trilogy. You know, say what you will. You know, they are disjointed in part, but I enjoy it for the most part. Particularly, you know, it is from the maker. It is from George. So, Kenobi itself, obviously bringing back the amazing Ewan McGregor, who's kind of done a bit of resurgence in films that he had years ago. Like when he did a couple of years ago now, Trainspotting 2, which was an absolute cracker of a film. It was amazing. It was good to see the team back together in that one. And, of course, Danny Boyle. We've got Hayden Christensen returning, in this time full Darth Vader. It's going to be interesting because there's a couple of actors playing Darth Vader in this due to, obviously, stunt work and the size that Vader's meant to be. You know, because obviously Vader's a lot bigger than what Hayden Christensen's height-wise is too. Rupert Friend, who's quite an amazing actor, I must say. I've seen him in quite a bit of stuff now, is playing the lead Inquisitor. And obviously we've seen that Inquisitor in Rebels. Joel Edgerton from here and, of course, Sydney, playing Owen Lars in this one, folks. Good to see him back. Joel's a great actor. If you really want to see a good tie-in movie that he's done, go and check out the prequel to The Thing, which is actually called The Thing as well, folks. I really enjoyed that movie. That is one of those few movies which really just nails what should have been a sequel done to that one. We also have Kumail Nanjiani playing an undisclosed role. Rumour has it might be Jedi, so we'll have to see when that happens. Sung Kang playing the fifth brother. Hugely popular, playing, of course, a role in the Fast and Furious franchise. He's also in one of my favourite films the last few years, Ninja Assassin. Small part, but it's very, very good. Moses Ingram plays Reva. Reva is one of the Inquisitors, the third, and Moses looks like she's going to be fantastic in the role. She gets some great scenes in the trailer itself too. We've got Indira Varma playing Tia. She was from Game of Thrones. We've got Bonnie Pierce returning as Beru. Huge still to this day in the Star Wars fandom. She's always been out there since the prequels and going to conventions, and great musician. We've also got Simone Kessel and O'Shea Jackson Jr. and Benny Safdie as well. Okay, so that's the lead part of everything at this stage. Looks like at this stage, that Reva will be the main villain, at least for the first couple of episodes. These Force-sensitive Inquisitors are nothing new to Star Wars stories. Obviously, they're a big part of the lore. They've been part of the role-playing games for a long, long time, and now, obviously, it's a big part of Star Wars itself, with it being from Rebels, and we got ties to that also in Clone Wars as well. So what am I expecting from this series? It's a smaller run, but what I will say is we're going to see Obi-Wan go through the ringer. I expect to see Qui-Gon through some of this, and I don't think it's going to be a Force ghost as such. I think it's going to be more delusions in the mind of Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan's going to be at his lowest point as he's hit Tatooine. Obviously, he's looking after Luke. Probably get some shoving back from Joel Edgerton's character, Owen Lars, a bit. But for the most part, when he's on his mission and stuff like that, I think what it's going to do is drive him to have more hope towards the end of the story. We're going to see a character arc for him that's going to be quite a bit different than what you're used to. Somebody that had faith, lost it, and now has to climb back in and get that hope back. And that's the big part of this story that I'm looking forward to.
Hi, this is John Morton from The Empire Strikes Back, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
For years, the prequels have been laughed at. They've been given all sorts of ridicule, and they certainly have seen their fair share of people that have also liked it and loved it as well. You know, it's a like it or love it series of films. These were films really directly from the mind of George Lucas, and he certainly had a way that he wanted to get these movies out. At its heart, the Star Wars prequels is, of course, the life of a young Darth Vader. We get to see him rise from being a slave on Tatooine till Jedi Knight that he was going to be, and then, of course, from there, the fallen Jedi, who becomes, of course, the Dark Lord of the Sith, and sits by the side, of course, of the Dark Lord of the Sith, Darth Sidious. That is in a nutshell, folks. Obviously, we could get the mastery of people like, obviously, Obi-Wan Kenobi in this. We get to see that world of what the Jedi was like when it became decadent and obviously was falling apart to the point where they were so cocky they didn't see a Sith Lord in their midst right under their noses. Interesting idea that George had to begin with. Obviously, too, it was done at a time where he wanted to show the fall, you know, like the fall of the Republic that we need to see before the Empire comes in. There was a lot of different ideas design-wise. I remember still coming back to the days in, was it 97, when we started to see some of the designs from Doug Chiang, and we're like, hang on, is this Star Wars? And of course, a lot of it was for Naboo. And these days, there's some of that stuff's just absolutely classic. Things like the STAP, the STAP, that battle droid vehicle, which was one of the first things that Hasbro delivered out into stores as a bit of a sneak peek of what was to come with the prequels. And it was great. It was fantastic. I still have that and I still love it. But what I really remember from that period too is just the questioning of, hang on, this is a little bit different, vastly different from what we remember of the Ralph McQuarrie designs. But George was going back to a sleeker time where things weren't mass-produced. Things were done by hand, handcrafted. And obviously, we saw that design with a lot of the Naboo stuff. And, you know, it kept moving on from there too. Then, of course, we've got Coruscant and Tatooine and all these other amazing planets that would start to pop up in the series. The Trade Federation obviously had little links to what would become the Empire with the designs of their ships. In particular, having a very Death Star-like center. And of course, we've got an amazing cast back then that popped up, especially in the first film. We've got Liam Neeson taking the lead there, who really started his mentor work in films like Rob Roy, and then Michael Collins, and then, of course, in this film. And from there, he's pretty much been known as the mentor guy. And he's great in those roles. And he shines as Qui-Gon Jinn. He's definitely one of the best things in the film. There's a real life to him. You can see how he's influenced the likes of Anakin to think outside the box and not really be, doing things the way the Jedi say by doctrine. Of course, his master to become around the corner, Obi-Wan Kenobi, would do that, and also take some ideas from Qui-Gon Jinn as well. So we have that. Obviously, we have Jake Lloyd as Anakin Skywalker in this. We have Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now, that triumvirate that we have there is interesting because, you know, Jake Lloyd is playing a very, very young character in this, and it's definitely at the sort of time that Jedi even wouldn't be picked up at that age. It would be much younger as younglings. So even he's a bit too old to, like his son-to-be, Luke as well, too old to be trained. We've got Natalie Portman playing, of course, Queen Amidala in it as well. She did an amazing job with a part that probably wasn't given enough time here and there, but I think, she always shines in what she does. And surprising, to this day, she's one of the greatest things about the prequel trilogy when it comes down to the fact that her and Hayden in particular work so well together in the last two films. I really think there's not just a chemistry there, but there's a sense of fun, and particularly in the latter half of Star Wars Attack of the Clones. But there's something that definitely they had some fun making. And it would have been hard too, folks. You got to think about it. You got all this green screen and blue screen, which Ewan McGregor himself has talked about a number of times, just how hard that was to just imagine things all the time. Instead of doing like Denis Villeneuve does on Dune and actually making the damn things. Building sets, huge sets. And it's what's been remarked on the Dune film in particular is just how much was there to really give a sense of scale and stuff. And that's why that film shines more than a lot of science fiction films of late. But getting back to it, the prequels had such a huge scope. It almost felt like Star Wars, the original trilogy, was in one little corner of the galaxy. Whereas this is really showing us the entire galaxy as a whole. So we got to see one sort of portion of that in The Phantom Menace. And then as we get into Attack of the Clones, we really started to open up a lot more doors, in particular seeing the variety that is involved in the galaxy in terms of locations and alien races and stuff like that are in there too, different cultures. But also I think the thing is too, adding in the big thing of the clones. The clones was such a huge thing that we've always wondered about. If you played the West End games like I did as a kid, you remember a lot of that sort of stuff coming in. They didn't talk about it a lot. They didn't do too much because, again, it was something that George decided to keep on the low, down low, and not talk about it as much. But that's where things grew out of after that. And it's interesting how it grows in this. Particularly the addition of Boba Fett. In this case, his father, Jango Fett. A lot of the fan fiction before the film even came out was in some ways even more interesting than the actual film. The film came out and obviously it ticked all the boxes it needed to link up Fett with obviously the Stormtrooper idea later on. But some of the other ideas that people had, bringing in the likes of even Bail Organa fighting alongside Obi-Wan Kenobi, literally with a sword and everything in the Clone Wars. It was very interesting and really turned him into what would have been an interesting character. There's a lot of different interpretations on what and how things should happen and bringing in more Mandalorian sort of influence in that film instead of what we got.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
Out of all three, the one that doesn't get enough notice is Attack of the Clones. Obviously, with Revenge of the Sith, it's the full downfall. The Phantom Menace is really exploring the symbiotic relationship between the Gungans and the Naboo as well. And he's talking about, obviously, his ideas on the Force there as well. I won't get into it, but, of course, midi-chlorians are a huge part of that story. When you get down to it, Attack of the Clones is both a detective story and also a war film with a love story in the middle. Yeah, we've got some really interesting concepts in that. We've got the Jedi Starfighter, the Delta Wing Starfighter, which is one of the best ideas in the entire trilogy. Even more so than the Jedi Interceptors, although they are very cool. The Jedi Starfighter really is the first of the starships that would lead to, of course, the Star Destroyers. Now, if you got the Hasbro version, it had an attack mode, which would literally strip away everything on the ship except for the main apex of the ship and, of course, the cockpit, and then would turn the wings into TIE Fighter wings. Along with also the Sith Infiltrator, which had obviously a little bit more leadings to that with the CNR Systems designer that it was. Obviously, down there from that too, we would then get into the 806 Interceptors in Revenge of the Sith. Now, those were a much more chilled design. And I think, too, what I love about those was just the power and speed of them. The fact that the Jedi, they just crashed one, they grabbed another one. There just seemed to be an indispensable amount of Jedi Interceptors just lying around as we went to Revenge of the Sith. Again, because they were starting to really build up the Empire at that stage, unbeknownst to everyone else, too. Then there's the detective story, folks, of it all. And obviously we find out about Sifo Dyas. For years, after the release of Revenge of the Sith, well, even before that, Attack of the Clones, when we found out about Jedi Master Sifo Dyas, commissioned a clone army. Sifo Dyas, we're like, oh, well, obviously it's a play on the words Darth Sidious, isn't it? And then years later, George came up with the idea that there really was a Sifo Dyas and put it in the Clone Wars. There wasn't a need to really explore that too much further in the Clone Wars, but they still did it anyway. Christopher Lee as Darth Tyrannus was very good, playing Count Dooku. Fantastic, really good, and it's obviously brought in a lot of the taunting of the series too. But when you get down to it too, folks, the sword work in the series done by Nick Gillard, there's elements that I like, and as a martial artist, elements that I don't like as well. Definitely the pick of the bunch would be the main fight in The Phantom Menace between Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Maul. Now, you got Ray Park playing Darth Maul, who actually is a real martial artist and knows what he's doing with a weapon. Then we've got two guys that are basically movie martial artists or movie sword fighters. They've been taught how to sword fight, and not correctly when it comes down to a real traditional sword fight. Coming as someone that's actually done quite a bit of sword fighting, I can tell you, my interpretation of it is, there's a certain amount of martial arts in this. You look at some of the moves Obi-Wan's doing, particularly when he opened up his entire guard, swings the sword the other way, then comes back around, not making any more power with the swing, but still does it and then gets blocked by Maul. This one thing, you never give up your guard. Unless you've got a sure hit, folks, you never give it. And that's like the same through with any martial arts. Any type of fighting, you need to keep your body covered at all times. But it's flashy. But the second fight with Maul and Obi-Wan once Qui-Gon's down, that is still probably my favourite fight out of all the Star Wars films. It's quick, efficient, probably a bit too much jumping in it, but it is deadly, and that's really what it should be. Obviously, the other films we've seen, the original trilogy and stuff like that, a lot of that was literally an old man, or half-robot old man, and some young kid that doesn't know how to fight yet. To see the Jedi in their prime like this, that's the real fight. I was quite disappointed with the second film's fight scenes. And then, there's a handful in Revenge of the Sith that are quite good. Obviously, Anakin and Dooku's fight's quite good. I actually quite like the Grievous fight with Obi-Wan. But again, it's kind of a fun fight. He knows he can take out Grievous. So there's a sense of swashbuckling play there happening at the same time. But there's some interesting characters in the series. Obviously, Jango Fett is a big part that's obviously explored further as we go into all the other roles. And right now, straight up to now, where he's basically playing the father again now too, playing Boba Fett in the Book of Boba Fett. Tamura Morrison, fantastic in that series. Samuel L. Jackson playing Mace Windu. Great character. I think the execution, probably from George, is not great. And a lot of that is, he gets some bits and pieces here and there, particularly in the desert arena and Attack of the Clones. Then we've got scenes like in Revenge of the Sith, where it's him trying to arrest Palpatine, and they obviously had some elaborate fight set up, and then it becomes literally just a stick-on-stick match, basically. It's just block here, block here, block here, block here. So quite underwhelming if this is the greatest Jedi that they've currently got. Greatest master apart from Yoda. And that's what's interesting about it too, is that there could have been better versions of these out there too. Penelope August as Shmi Skywalker plays it really, really well. She's great. You can see there's a haunting story behind hers and Anakin's story. And I think, what's great about that is that haunting sort of quality. You still question just what really happened. This immaculate conception of Anakin. Just how did the Sith Lords get this to happen? And, it's kind of answered, but not. I mean, Darth Sidious is the novel you need to read, even though it's considered not Disney canon. But guess what? If you like the book, it's in your head canon. It's canon. That's it. Like a lot of what they've done there too. But again, like we're talking about the literary universe, a lot of the books done around the time of the prequels really fleshed out a lot of what we enjoy about the Star Wars prequels. And some great games. Jedi Power Battles came out around the time of Phantom Menace. A lot of fun. Obviously, too, we got Episode 1 Racer at the same time. So it's a real celebration of Star Wars when they came around.
This is Steve Bloom, voice of Zeb Aurelius, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. Caravast. May the Force be with you.
You either love it or you hate it, because a lot of people went to that first film and obviously they rip apart the film in the reviews. There's been a lot of people that, whether it's from the wacky sort of characters and stuff like that, or the story not being exactly what they expected, and how serious the Jedi are without, some type of swashbuckling nature. No, they're monks. Jedi are monks. And you don't see monks going around doing that sort of stuff. I had a feeling of that already because, you look at the influence, both samurai and obviously warriors, very much more like monk societies like the Shaolin warriors and stuff like that. The Shaolin monks, more akin to the Jedi than probably the samurai. Samurai, we get the swordplay from it, I think, more than anything too. But, it's that ability to really be not a police force. The Jedi aren't that. The Jedi are negotiators, literally. And if you don't negotiate verbally with them, well, they take the next step. But that's really what it is in a nutshell. And I think a lot of people were expecting more of the original trilogy flavour. But say what you will, they're quite cohesive films. You know, they work together well. And certainly the new editions that came out on Blu-ray recently were quite good. Scaled up, obviously, to 4K, which I mean should have been done years ago, folks, you know. But Attack of the Clones came out, probably the best of those too. I think they look really, really good. Looking back on the series, if you compare that to currently what's being done in the film series like the sequel trilogy, which is, you know, each film is beautifully crafted. You know, they're very well-made films, but there's no cohesion. Had they had one filmmaker cohesive sort of system, would have been fantastic. But the stories are too disjointed. Each story is strong. That's what's great about those films. They are quite strong and great adventures for the most part. But they don't link up quite as well as the prequel trilogy did, or the original trilogy either. You know, for me, still standouts to this day out of the new run of films are Rogue One, without a doubt, and Solo. Solo's underrated film, folks. I would love to have seen more of that era of Han Solo, particularly now that they've just picked up the Millennium Falcon for himself, obviously off Lando. What's great about that period is we get all those great adventures with Chewbacca, which we've, you know, read about from the Brian Daley novels and vice versa. That's the sort of period that I love. Or the A.C. Crispin novels, you know, that young smuggler that's going through all the motions. And we covered it a little while ago, folks, in the early episode 50s here on the Fantha Tracks, the Fantha From Down Under. So go and have a look at some of those. We're going to be doing the Lando novels very soon here on the podcast, and I can't wait to get into those because, again, such an amazing character. Thanks for listening to the Fantha From Down Under. If you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit fanthatracks.com or check out the free Fantha Tracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. You can also find me over at Fandom Podcast Network, where I host The Lethal Mullet, Making Tracks with Mark Newbold, and Mullet and Kilt with Greg Robertson. That's right, Darth Elvis. And you can find me on Twitter at The Lethal Mullet. You can comment, like, share any of our social media feeds at Fantha Tracks. Be sure to subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Fantha Tracks intro, and Mark Daniel, and of course Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Remember to tune in to our Fantha Tracks news show, Good Morning Tatooine, live Sunday evenings at 9 p.m. UK, 4 p.m. Eastern, and 1 p.m. Pacific on Facebook and YouTube. This is Star Wars news in a single file. May the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's Making Tracks.